Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week, we have a look at the 1983 film Psycho 2. This is episode 420. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have seen it. So warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, publisher at Castle Bridge Media, home of the Castle of Horror anthology. With me from Austin is Tony Salvaggio, lead singer and bassist of the band Deserts of Mars, and lead guitarist of the band Rise from Fire. Say hello, Tony.
Howdy.
Howdy. Also in Austin, Mr. Drew Edwards is the writer-creator of the long-running underground comic Halloween Man, which you can find at Global Comics. He is a Best Writer Ringo nominee, Austin Chronicle Best of Austin Award winner, and a member of the PEN America Fellowship. Say hello, Drew.
I don't kill people anymore.
That's like I don't drink wine. And finally, also in Denver, color commentary from Julia Guzman of Guzman Immigration of Denver. Say hello.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Oh, so exciting! This is Thanksgiving week, and we're recording, just before some of us get a break, and it's just nice to be together. Okay, Psycho 2. Which was very prominent when I was growing up. Psycho 2 is a 1983 American psychological slasher film directed by Richard Franklin, written by Tom Holland, not that one, the other one, and starring
not
Anthony
Spider-Man?
Not Spider-Man. It's
the director of Fright Night and Child's Play.
Right, the creator of Child's Play, yeah. The film stars Anthony Perkins, Vera Miles, Robert Loggia, and Meg Tilly. It is the first sequel to Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 film Psycho. It's the second film in the Psycho franchise. It's set 22 years after the first movie. It follows Norman Bates after he is released from the mental institution, returns to the house in the Bates Motel to try to continue a normal life, but his troubled past continues to haunt him as someone begins to murder people around him. This movie was released in June of 1983. It grossed $34.7 million against a budget of $5 million. It was shot almost entirely on the Universal backlot. It cost very little, and it was a huge hit. It's totally unrelated to the 1982 novel Psycho 2 by Robert Bloch. And this is just me talking. It's also much better than the novel Psycho 2. Robert Bloch's a wonderful writer, but the movie is better than the book. Maybe people will write in and disagree with me on that. So let's talk about it. I think where we are at, it's Tony, Joya, Drew, and then I'll go for opening thoughts. Tony, first of all, anytime it's an early 80s movie, I assume other people had the same experience I did. Did you watch this like a million times on HBO or
Yeah. I watched it at least a couple of times. I don't know why I didn't watch it more, but it was on. I mean, it was on all the time. Like if you had cable during the time period that it got a release, it was on all the things. And I think it was one of those too. Like it's bizarre to think about now, but the way a block would work, if you weren't familiar, if you weren't as old as us, like you might get like HBO. I'm not even talking about having HBO 1, 2, and 3. I'm talking about like you would have HBO, Cinemax, Showtime, the movie channel. And depending on which package, if you were super savvy, if you're super rich, you might have all 4.
Right.
But you might catch movies like this on like a one time period, and then an hour later they would start it on another channel.
Yeah.
Depending on how the distribution went. And then sometimes it would be all throughout the day on all, like it was showing at some point in time on all 4. Usually it was just 2 because it was, HBO Cinemax was one and Showtime Movie Channel was another one.
Every month you would get the premium guide, and you'd look at like what was playing, and basically they'd have like, hey, we got 5 or 7 new movies this month, and they would play over and over and over again.
And then once you were a teenager, you look for all the codes, like, wait, sexual content? Graphic nudity, I think, because they had like little,
especially
letters.
if it was like FFN, which stood for full frontal nudity, and then you're like, well, that's worth sneaking down at 2:00 in the morning for. So
yeah, if
I don't know if you can see me shaking my head, but I'm shaking my head.
Oh, of course. I mean, I think that's probably the correct response. But if you're a teenage boy and like in cable, the internet, there wasn't a thing. There was always you could always view skin. Like this was the world of, it could in graphic content you didn't know, was it just going to be gory? Was there going to be, a breast, a boob? I don't know, like,
Yes.
it's so weird to think about and to think how much things have changed. But yeah, I remember I watched it at least a couple times at the time, but also, usually the other part of that actually though is, I was usually staying with my grandparents
Mm.
when I didn't have cable, at our house. So, staying with my grandparents and my stepbrothers. And so if, that was like, hey, if you could stay up late at night, you could watch, horror movies. But, kind of the other spots, like, what are you watching kind of thing? And, Psycho had this like buildup
Yeah.
of, it's this, this shower scene had this almost at the time, because you didn't catch reruns as much, or they didn't show Psycho as much. I think the shower scene itself was kind of built up in a way that seemed larger and more mythical in some ways. Just because, so this was on all the time, but they would never show Psycho because it was an old black and white movie. How are we gonna get advertisers to watch that? Do that on cable?
Yeah.
Right. So there was a kind of a mythical, like, oh, it's gonna be darker, and so I kind of got the impression that this was gonna be that at the time. I still think it's actually a really fascinating movie. It tries to do a lot, and I'm not sure if that's a strength or weakness. Like there's a lot of stuff going on that makes it interesting, but also in some ways maybe too many different things. I don't know. I'm kind of torn when I think about it, but it was kind of cool to revisit it, definitely.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Julia, first of all, did Psycho 2 like occupy any space in your mind, or is this just fresh?
No, I don't think I'd ever seen it before. I mean, I didn't love it, but I liked it. I thought it was fun. I didn't get really into it for a while. It took I feel like it kind of got slow start.
Mm.
Anthony Perkins is really interesting actor, and his
Mhm.
performance is fascinating.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate that reading about the Meg Tilly and him just did not get along, and
Oh,
he
really?
wanted
I
her
didn't know that.
he wanted her fired because she basically she didn't know Psycho the original, like, so she was just not, she didn't get what was the big deal and why everybody was making such a fuss about Tony Perkins, and so he was just like, he was just irritated by everything about her. So I mean, now I know that, I'm like, well, that's unfortunate. But it actually probably worked for her being kind of weirded out around him a lot. That's, I guess, one of the things I don't like is that her reactions to him are so inconsistent. Because on the one hand, she'll be like nervous and scared of him, and then immediately after, she'll be like, "Here's a big knife" or whatever. So I'm just like, which is it? But so I think it was. I'm glad that we watched it for sure. I am interested in talking some more about the book, because have you read it, Jason, or you just know about it?
Oh, I read it, but I read it
Okay,
back in the
yeah.
80s, so it's
Well, yeah,
been
I want to talk
some
about that
time.
a little bit as we go in, because I'm interested in. I just was reading the synopsis and it sounded kind of interesting. So,
Yes.
but yeah, yeah, it's some interesting performances. And it was definitely not predictable. Like I was for sure going, oh, maybe it's this person. Oh, maybe it's, no, you know what? I bet's happening. And I never got it right. So that's always
Yeah.
good. I always
I thought
like
you
it when
did
I
pretty
can't.
good.
Well, by the end, I knew the end, but it took
Yes.
me a long time to get there.
Yeah, but you did better than I did on this. Cool. Drew, I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, okay, so Norman Bates is always a complicated character for me to discuss because he is arguably the most famous fictional case of what they would have called split personality disorder or multiple personality disorder, nowadays dissociative identity disorder, which is a diagnosis that I have and live with, and so there's that, right there going into it.
I'm going to ask you about that. Actually, I'm not going to ask you about
I'm
your
fine with
condition,
that,
but
but
right.
like I wouldn't have brought it up if I wasn't okay talking about it. But I did actually try, because like this is the fourth time I've seen this. It's not a
Oh,
movie
yeah.
I've seen a bunch, but it's a movie that I guess I revisit like once a decade. The last time I watched it actually was in a Terror Tuesday at the Alamo Draft House about a decade ago. Jamie and I went and saw it. I'm with Tony and Julia. I think it's an interesting movie. It's definitely undergone kind of one of those critical reappraisals in recent years. There's some people who say that they think it's better than the original. I think that is
Quentin Tarantino
hipster.
being one of those.
Yeah, that's hipster horseshit. But
Yeah,
but
I mean, you don't get this without the original, and it doesn't have any impact without. Like, I don't know
I
about
will
all that.
say this though. It's really interesting seeing Norman as the victim through most of the movie,
Right,
and
yeah.
not the victimizer. That is fascinating. And Tony Perkins is wonderful at playing that. And elicits a lot of sympathy, even though we, as people who are familiar with the original Psycho, know that he is potentially dangerous.
Yeah.
Well,
I also think, I like Megan Tilly in this. I think her reactions are the way at least I justify them in my head, or maybe it's her performance, but she's somebody that wants to be sympathetic to Norman, but is also justifiably scared of him for reasons that we will get into as we discuss the plot. I think so yeah, I do think it's a really interesting movie with a terrific performance from its central figure. I think this sort of I can't say this word right now. The sort of mythology around it, that it's this unsung classic, is perhaps a bit overblown. I think saying that it's way better than you would think a sequel to Psycho could possibly be is a fair assessment. I don't like anybody saying that this is better than the original. To me, I kind of want to like take you and shake you and go, don't be a contrarian. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff that I said that I'm sure we're gonna have to unpack later on, but that's where I'm at as far as opening thoughts.
Tony, what were you gonna say?
Well, a couple things, based off of, it's interesting too, because there's so much time passed between the original and this. It adds to that mystique, because when people, I know I wasn't probably allowed to see Psycho, as a kid, and then by the time I was older, I was actually watching newer stuff, and it's like, well, do I go back and watch an old black and white movie? Plus, who's showing it? Like I said, right? Like now we can watch it, almost any time, probably in some way, shape, or form. But the idea of, and what you're talking about, Meg Tilly, like not knowing, like it kind of makes sense but it's also, everybody, if you were seeing it on cable, you might have a similar reaction to how everybody else interacts with Norman Bates. Oh yeah, Norman Bates, I've heard about him. What's the deal? And also in a pre-internet way as well, right? So you would have had to know newspapers or word of mouth, or hear some rumors, or oh, he's back, he got released, I didn't hear about that, all that stuff. But then that's kind of the same with the movie. And I remember it kind of, if I remember correctly, it wasn't critically acclaimed at all. I think people were like, it's a travesty, you're making it, oh look who's
correct
making a sequel, why are you making a sequel to a Hitchcock classic, he's not making it, stuff like that. And so, but I think in retrospect, while I don't think it's better than the original, I will say that it's better than I remembered it in many ways, and it's better than perhaps what I think people thought it was going to be, whether they thought that at the time or not.
And I think that is a completely fair assessment, by the way. Like, like people who would say that this is a bad movie just based on the principle of that it is a sequel to a Hitchcock film, they are also wrong. So, but and there's a lot to be said.
They'd be forgiven for having that prejudice, because that's a fairly normal feeling to have. Like if somebody said, "Hey, ET2 actually better than you would expect," like I don't even want to see something called ET2. By the way, it doesn't.
Right. But I get get why people would feel like, and also, we have a lot of like modern, so we'll have modern remakes or reimaginings happening,
Yeah.
Halloween, Friday the 13th, etc. And this was, also, I get why people might be hesitant because it was an update. It was bringing it into 80s horror. And
Yes.
Well, it's
you
way
could see somebody
more.
also, yeah, you could see somebody going, well, that's not what the classic was about. Like, oh, you're just gonna and lump it in with a lot of slashers and stuff that were going on at the time.
Yeah,
Which
and
is,
that would
the fact
be
that slasher movies were on the upswing is, had to be at least one of the factors why this even got made, right?
yes, yes.
So,
But
I can see that kind of, it's that plus minus, like, do we need to remake it? But here, but we are, and what's that going to be? So, this is the we'll see this come about a lot more later, but this was on the vanguard of like, whoa, you're going to remake
it's
that with
funny.
modern sensibilities, and modern being 80s, early 80s sensibilities, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to overstate what a holy grail the original Psycho was at the time. Like how much
Sure.
people really held it in incredible regard. I think Tarantino has this tendency to overstate things just to sort of draw attention to something, and that's not this is not me. I'm not trashing Tarantino, but I mean,
Right.
he'll say, oh, this movie with Ryan O'Neal is my favorite spy movie. He doesn't literally mean that. He just means, please pay attention to this because nobody's ever heard of it. And I think he does that too with Psycho 2. I mean, he's like, look, one thing that I thought Tarantino got exactly right, and that I was thinking about when I was watching this movie, is that this movie, and Drew, you alluded to this, the movie opens up, and from the first moment that you see Norman Bates, the movie puts you so that you are on Norman's side. You want him to be well treated. He's been treated. It's been successful. He's feeling good. He's going to go back and get a job. And I mean, you compare that to like Dirty Harry or something.
But I disagree. I disagree. I
You don't
think
think
that
so?
no, I think that you see him and you go, I just don't know. I don't know if he's
Oh,
actually
I didn't
better.
feel that way at all. I mean, I was really like, hey guys, quit
No,
picking
because
on Norman.
I just disagree because like when you're in the courtroom, because you start out in the courtroom,
Yeah,
the way they show him is he kind of looks to the like from behind, he kind of looks to the side, like over his shoulder. It's creepy. So I actually didn't think that he was all better. I actually did
that's
not believe that.
fascinating. Okay,
Yeah.
fair. I anyway, that so I personally, when I was watching it, I was completely charmed by Tony Perkins as affable Norman, who it's like they took all the bad parts out and they left a lovable guy who just wants to run a motel and not have any drugs around, and like I really I'm on the ride with Norman.
Well, I
I'm
came
completely
around
down.
to that assumption, but at first I was like, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know. I just don't know. But then
I
you
have a
kind of start
question
thinking
for
like,
you about that, Julia, though.
hmm
yeah.
How much of that is based off of the film itself or based off of what you know about the character?
no, I looked when you're in the courtroom, I looked at him and the way he looked over his shoulder was so creepy that I went, I just don't think that Norman Bates is all better. The Norman Bates from Psycho is all better.
Well,
So it was totally
all
about that.
better is an illusion anyway when we're talking about mental health. But this is also a movie, so
Right.
that's
But
a
I mean, like,
complicated thing.
in other words, I didn't think that he was necessary. I thought it was possible that he had fooled them into letting him go.
Mm.
Then, as you kind of follow him for a while, you start to go, no, I think maybe he is. He does have it under control. Like the whole like. So he's not. It's going to be fine. And then when you start to go, oh, I think somebody else is doing the murders. Then you start. Well, at least I started feeling really sorry for him. I was like, oh shit, they're going to try to frame him and put him back in the mental institute, and he hasn't done anything wrong, and he has it totally under control. So then I totally felt bad for him. So I kind of went on a roller coaster with that character.
So I have a question. The first major, I'm really interested in this question, and Drew, I expect that you'll have the bulk of the answers here. But I think in 1983, very few people in the country would have been asking it. I think in today's age, we ask these questions more. Is it inappropriate to exploit a fear of mental illness for entertainment? Like is that, or should we get away from stories like this? Should we stop making them? What's your thoughts on that?
So I don't like absolutes like I think because like I'm not out to make people feel bad for enjoying this film or enjoying the original film, which is a wonderful movie. What I do wish is that there was better awareness of Norman Bates is as he appears in this movie and in the original movie is a terrible representation of the disorder that he is supposed to have. First of all, people with DID generally are not violent. And they call the movie is called Psycho. Dissociative identity disorder is actually not the
Not a
same.
psychosis, right?
It's not the same as being a psychopath. Like that's a completely different type of psychological issue. But as you said, the original novel and the original film, which this is cut from the same cloth, has this sort of exploitation. What I wish is I look, like, again, I'm not out to make anybody feel bad for enjoying this because I enjoy this film, but like I do wish that I am tired of seeing, when I have to see characters that are, because everybody wants to see themselves represented in fiction, like everybody, I get tired of always having to be the villain. And the thing I do find refreshing, at least for the majority of this film, is that Norman is the victim. And that is actually more realistic to the way people with psychological issues, with people who are neuroatypical, with people who are mentally ill, they are more likely to be victimized than be victimizers most of the time. So, like, that aspect of this particular film is kind of refreshing, but unfortunately, because it also has to function as a slasher movie, it ends on a very sad note for Norman, that despite how much he wants to rehabilitate and be healthy and manage himself, that's never going to be able to happen. But it's also like, this is also came out in the early 80s. So there, like a lot of the psychology that we're seeing in play here is sort of like the pop psychology of the day. Like there's not a whole lot of, like, Norman shows a lot of symptoms that somebody, not just the fact that he's homicidal, but he shows a lot of symptoms that aren't really associated with again, what they would have called multiple personality disorder. That being said, the flip side of it is you do get this really, like, if I'm just, this is why I'm saying this is such a complicated thing to unpack, because I absolutely love all of Anthony Perkins' acting. Like, if I just view him as kind of an almost, more like a Frankenstein monster kind of thing, all of the stuff that he's doing, like the physical business, like the way he, like, when he's talking to his alter on the, or what he thinks might be his alter on the phone, and he switches the phone out from one ear to the other, and that stuff, like all that business of that is like, that's terrific. And like, his acting is great, and he elicits a lot, like he does this great job of, and it's a carryover from the original film, but he comes off as this sort of, is very like boyish and very naive, but you also believe that there's something dangerous underneath. And he does,
it takes something, by the way, for a 51-year-old man to appear boyish, but he does.
Yeah,
Well,
he does.
Face.
He just seems like he's getting the shit kicked out of him by the world. I love his trauma when he's just he'll stare at a door and the door will give him flashbacks.
He's great.
He shouldn't be in that house, is the thing.
Well,
they would have never. That's another thing. They would have never moved. Well, I know his psychiatrist tries to talk him out of it. So like, there's that. But like, that's that sort of like the Ryan George, like, so the movie could happen kind of thing. Because like but like, it's we're gonna talk about this off and on, and I know I'm like monopolizing the conversation, and I'm sure.
Well, I kind of asked it towards you because. Go ahead, Tony. What's that?
Also, historically, though, I mean, this is 81. We start to see politics turning out mental patients, people who were in institutions, patients with
true.
actual problems that need to be taken care of,
Yeah.
got defunded, and there was a lot of patients being turned out into the streets, etc. Like, this was a really harsh time, and so I was surprised in watching it and forgotten that he's actually legit getting out. Like, he's got a caseworker with him. They're trying to help him. Caseworker says, hey, really, are you sure? Like, you really shouldn't go back to your hotel. You shouldn't go back to your house. And he's like, no, it's mine. I'm going to do it. But like, in the real world, it makes a certain kind of strange sense, because this is, people are being released into, without care, but even like, oh, well, I think they're good enough.
Yeah.
Sure, it would just, we'll have somebody looking on them. That kind of stuff is happening, and that's putting it way simplistically, right? But it was a real thing, starting in, I guess, I think it was 81, if I'm not mistaken. And so a couple years later, all of this kind of culminates in what's going on. I think Ray and I were having similar discussions. I think, there's movies that will tackle it well, but I think it's kind of crummy, but I think we're only just now getting to the point where we can have discussions, or we are having discussions of like, ooh, that's not really how this works, because like so many things, things are demonized, and
that's the so like going back to like the fact that how complicated this is, like, just for me to be on this podcast, and because I certainly I can't imagine that I was being this when we did the original Psycho, which is now God knows how many episodes ago. I can't imagine that I was being this open talking about this stuff at that point, because like, for the longest time you really couldn't. So like, that's why the exploitation is there. The flip side of that is, like, as much as I would love there to be like, a drama or something that didn't exploit this, the fact of the matter is, because I'm a horror fan, I'm in this weird position of, yeah, somebody could make like the really great drama about dissociative identity disorder, but I might not be as likely to watch it, because that's not what I watch for entertainment. Like, I watch horror films.
Right.
So
that
like, the
comes
fact
real
that
close to saying that exploitation has a place, which I'm not saying that, and I'm not saying that. I haven't really thought
I
it
think
through.
I think it does, but like, the problem is that we live in a world where, like, and we were just talking about this when there was a group of people who were burn victims, who were saying that they would like some sort of like warning or whatever put on the Nightmare on Elm Street movie, saying like, hey, this character doesn't represent everybody who has burn scars.
Right.
And people on the Joe Bob Briggs there's people on the Joe Bob Briggs Facebook group that lost their minds about that. They got so bent out of shape. So like, that's the problem. Like, I could say like, look, I'm okay with Psycho 2 being a movie. I just wish there would be like, I wish there would be something like, well, this represents an outdated or unrealistic, something saying that this movie,
I like that idea, by the way. Disney does that. For what it's worth, they will put, hey, the thing you're about to watch contains I can't remember their actual
But the
words.
problem with that is there are people that's still too much to them, that like, that they're like, oh, you're giving into the quote unquote woke mob, and it's like, that's not even censorship. That's not changing the movie. Like, it's so
funny, because it's also angels on the head of a pin, because only a small percentage of the population, us plus like a few other people percentage wise, are even give a shit about Psycho 2 or the Headless Horseman, or like, we're into this stuff, but it doesn't, it doesn't matter really, so it's arguing about whether or not to put a warning on it is so silly.
Well, it just goes to show you like that people, like, it's an imagined repression, because like, And I think a lot of that, though, I think it's people interpret that as oh, the person that put the warning on this thinks I'm a bad person for enjoying this
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah,
And and that's not actually the case. It's like I'm saying, I am the person that stands to be negatively prejudiced for
Right.
this movie existing. And I'm saying I enjoy this movie. It's okay to enjoy this movie, but it also should be positioned in a place to where people understand that this is not a psychiatry book,
Yeah.
and this is not where you should get your information on that, and and perhaps it warrants further discussion if need be. But that's not the same as censorship. Like I wouldn't cut anything out of this movie. And I think about this, like a similar discussion when I just did the Nerd Night lecture. There was the people from Queer Film Theory, and they talked a lot about Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 and how that can be a good springboard for talking about being queer and being in the closet. And this movie could perhaps function similarly in a similar way. And I'm not saying that like every time you watch a movie, it's okay to watch a movie and just be entertained by it. I'm not saying everybody needs to watch this movie and they'd immediately go write a thesis on what they've learned about the ins and outs of living with mental illness. But like, if it does provoke a discussion, like to your point, Jason, that does make exploitation have a positive side.
That's
if
so
we
interesting.
get that
So I would accept all of that. Both that
it's a
possibly
double-edged sword,
exploitation.
man. It's complicated.
Yeah.
By the way,
Oh, go ahead, Tony.
By the
Yeah.
way, also, just as a side note, if you are looking for more of the discussion you were mentioning, there's a documentary, I think we talked about it, Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street, about Nightmare on Elm Street 2. That's a really great doc.
That is an amazing movie.
It's that there's so much in that. I mean, that's a whole but just when you mentioned Nightmare 2, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't bring that back up, because if you're interested in that, the Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street, like definitely put that on your watch list, because it's a really fascinating movie and it's a tough movie in a lot of ways. There's a lot to it and a lot to be discussed, a lot to be discussed afterwards as well. So anyway.
So here we go. In the beginning of this film, I wanted to talk about basically the various characters because as I mentioned, this is a film that takes place almost entirely in a Universal backlot world, and I love it. So first of all, Richard Franklin, the director, he doesn't. What I love is that he said. Obviously, everybody in the world admires Psycho, but I'm going to make Psycho 2. I'm going to center Norman Bates. I'm going to come up with, Tom Holland is going to come up with an all new story. I'm going to make this movie look like whatever the hell I want it to look like. It looks nothing like a Hitchcock film. It's grimy. There's really deep texture everywhere. There's, grease and there's Dennis Franz dripping all over the place. And just like I love the fact that it just sort of dares to go, this is a film in the Psycho world, which we hope you will come along with if you liked that film, but it is not, it's just by no means a remake, which is funny considering how deeply tied it is into the first movie. I mean, it's basically, it's reboot like, because it's got, or legacy sequel, I suppose, because it's got Vera Miles returning as mean ass Lila, this woman who is so angry that they're letting Norman Bates out.
She is so much. The funny thing is I think if this movie came out now, I think there would be so many people that would be pissed off that she is essentially a villain in this movie after being a fairly sympathetic heroine in the original.
Why do you think people will be pissed off? I don't think so, because I think there's definitely, if anything, it's more that they might be pissed off that we don't see her as a more sympathetic character, because there's plenty of vigilante types who are like, oh, no, you don't get to come out of, like, you should be locked up forever because you did what you did to my family.
I
Now I'm going to
actually
make sure that you get locked up.
I actually think her reaction to Norman being let out is entirely realistic.
Yeah, just the fact that
to
she
a
murders.
to a point. The sort of
But it's very much
Agatha-
the Dirty Harry.
yeah,
vision,
but the sort
right?
of Agatha Christie style frame job she tries to pull is a bit absurd.
She doesn't
but
actually kill anybody, right?
she's not doing the killing, but she's perfectly fine with people being killed as long as it gets blamed on Norman.
And she's
Yeah, but I don't think she intended for anybody to get killed. I think she was just trying to make it look.
No, but she's
make him
terrible.
feel
I mean,
crazy.
she's presented as being
and I think it would be viewed as character assassination. Like I think it would be people would react to it the same way that a lot of people didn't like Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi because they
people
thought
feel that way in 60. It would just
maybe
depend
they
on whether
did.
people
I don't
could
know.
remember.
Like I would have to go back and read contemporary reviews of it, but I know that kind of thing is a lot more amplified because we have the internet.
Yeah, fealty to the way a character is presented. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now Meg Tilly,
I'm fascinated that they took a hero. They took the villain from the first movie, and that's what makes this movie interesting. They took the hero from one of the heroes from the first movie and made them a villain.
Yeah, they swapped them.
And they took the villain and they made them the hero, which
that's really interesting.
It is,
by the way, I was just looking at the last thing in the IMDb entry. It says that everybody in this cast is a killer except for Raymond, Lila, and Toomey. Everybody kills somebody at some point, which I think is fascinating. It's like tons of killers. But yeah.
I wanted well, I mean that first of all, that's just I think there's a possibility that Franklin that the director was actually playing off of where politics was because 83 is not admittedly it's 12 years after Dirty Harry, but still it feels very much like it's living in the world of Dirty Harry, where the Scorpio killer is let out and all these people are too concerned about his civil rights and it's going to get a busload of kids killed. And that was sort of where people were. And in the 80s, the early 80s, certainly with crime being way, way worse than it is today, and so there's this notion that we're too soft. So I think the director is kind of playing on meaning our people, us in 1983, our idea of what Hollywood tends to reflect back that we're too easy on dangerous people.
And that's why this movie I think is better than again, perhaps Tarantino is trolling a bit, but I think he's sophisticated enough to know that there is something interesting going on here. Yeah. And it's, what this movie is saying is that, because just like disregarding, my own real lived experiences.
Right.
Let's just take the first movie and this movie as we're looking at a biography of Norman Bates.
Yeah.
Norman Bates does not want to be a serial killer.
Right.
And in fact, in the first movie, he doesn't know that he is a serial killer. Right. He is essentially Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He has this, or the Wolfman, or something.
He's completely horrified by these things.
Yeah,
there's not a part of
they even replay the shower scene at the beginning of this, and he's like, "Mother, the blood." Like it's. So the fact that Norman is in this movie, he wants rehabilitation.
Yeah.
And that is like the fact that we're playing on that with arguably one of the most famous villains in horror movie history.
Yeah.
That's a daring choice because you're not giving. Well, just think about like we just had that discussion about Halloween Kills, which showed us a feeble had a very feeble Michael Myers through most of the movie. You're mixing up a formula like that is you're not always going to get the reaction,
right?
Yeah, you're not always going to get the reaction that you want, but I think in this case it works because, at least on paper, Norman is not supposed. I mean, the fact that I even call him Norman, like I'm not having to go, like when I say Freddy Krueger, most of the time I'm going to say Freddy Krueger, like, or we just spent 2.5 hours talking about Dracula last weekend with Monster Movie Happy Hour. Like they're not. Norman on paper is a normal guy who is, he's been traumatized.
Yeah.
And so he's disturbed. He's not a vampire. He's not a zombie. He could, in theory, get better. And I think of the stuff that this movie doesn't get right, because like I do think it does have an awful lot going on.
Yeah.
It does get this part of it right, because again, he's so sympathetic.
Yeah. And in many ways it plays like a thriller or a crime movie, because you see that he's being, or you suspect, and eventually you see that he's being conned, and there's double crosses and triple crosses that you would normally associate with a crime film. Like Meg Tilly's character is fascinating, and I'm poisoned by the fact that I've seen this movie before, so it's hard to like turn off what you know about the plot and just try to watch it not knowing where the hell it's going, because Norman, for plot reasons, takes a job very briefly as a fry cook and then quits it soon after, but because he's going to work at the hotel and they don't want him around anymore for blah blah blah. But he's there long enough to meet Meg Tilly, and Meg Tilly is a waitress at this Greasy Spoon, and her life's out of control. And Norman is like, well, listen, why don't you come and stay at my hotel, because I own a hotel, and it's that'll work out for you. And they develop this weird relationship that is not, to my knowledge, I don't think it's intended to be sexual or sexually enticing, because he's 30 years older than her. And
Well, that doesn't mean anything for him.
well, I don't know what it means. The thing is, I don't know what we're supposed to think is going on with
I
between
don't
these
think
characters.
that
He mostly just doesn't want to be alone.
Yeah,
Right.
I don't
Yeah.
think Tony Perkins plays it like he is sexually
No.
interested in her at all.
Right. He doesn't play it.
And
that
in
way.
fact, she's very matronly to him at times.
Yes.
Maternal.
There's a part that's there's hints of a lot of things. Again, once you know the plot, so when you don't know the plot, you're still going, look, you just get out. Like,
Right.
what are you doing, right? Like, you want to scream, like, but once we know that she's pushing buttons along the way,
Yeah.
and there is a part where I think there's like she's kind of flirty in a way, just again to push those buttons and kind of maneuver things, right? But quickly some of that, and that's not super overt, it's there, but quickly turns to that exactly kind of, oh, you know what, I kind of feel bad now, kind of.
Yes.
And that again, that's that kind of what's going on here aspect of things. The fact that we get so much of the twists and turns, like Julia was saying, like if you haven't seen it before, there is a lot to go, wait, no, so now he's totally the killer, right? Oh wait, that like,
right.
It's obviously
suspense
Chewie.
and build up
Chewie's
of it, the twists are actually really good.
Yeah.
And how that all plays out, and just how when you watch it twice for at least the second time, you're like, oh, okay, that's where they laid the foundation for this.
Yes.
And you start to see it kind of unfurl.
Tom Holland is doing a good job, right? I mean, this is like this is this is so different from, say, Child's Play, which is a very clever script, but clever in a totally different way. This one has...
in fairness, he also didn't do the soul writing on Child's Play. Like, we got to give credit to Don Mancini on that.
Right.
Correct. But what I mean is, for this script here, this has this constant reversal thing going on. That's like way more than you need. If somebody says, hey, here's $5 million, make a Psycho 2, it doesn't have to be this clever. Like this is way cleverer than that would suggest. And did you like my
perhaps
my impression
though?
Perhaps
though, what happened is the creatives involved knew that everybody was going to be coming with them with pitchforks and torches, and they were like, well, we better bring our A game. you know, like, yeah, you know, we could do a hacky piece of, and that movie does exist. There's the other Psycho sequels, by the way, and there's the sequel in the 90s that they did to The Birds, which is,
I haven't seen any of them.
I haven't seen that.
I
I like
pretty
to think
bad.
of a crowd of with pitchforks and torches and everything, but it's playing do 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 do, like as they're coming for
Here's
the
$5
movie.
million. Make a sequel to The Birds.
It's the you know, playing the soundtrack to a crowd of people
That's
with
great.
knives
I love
out
it.
for this movie.
Man, by the way, I was looking at Twilight Zone magazine. I shared this with you guys on the message list, where you know they were looking forward to it in 1983, and it's just so strange to try to put your mind back to like what people were expecting in 1983, you know, and you know, and no one could tell. Basically, it was just a high wire act. They were like, I don't know what's going to happen, but I want to see this, because the notion that Anthony Perkins 22 years later was going to play this role, that was just so strange to people. He's a fascinating guy.
Where was his career at this point, though? Because he kind of got typecast a little bit after playing Norman.
Well, he did play some villains, but he also played Inspector Javert in Les Miserables, I actually am. I'm sure that he could use the work just like any working actor. I mean, he was just a straight up. You know, I remember he played like the manipulative manager in Mahogany. You know, he's around.
I just wonder if like he took a lot of convincing, or if you know, they were just like, here's a boatload of money.
Apparently he did take convincing. Like he saw an earlier script that he didn't like. He liked this script, and it just so happened also that they had permission to do it, and so everything was lining up right, and so yes, he decided to do it. But that wouldn't explain why he did Psycho 3 and Psycho 4. I'm sure to some extent it's like you know, Pinhead, where he's like, you know what, I'm gonna keep doing it as long as people keep writing me checks. That's entirely possible. Um, shockingly, Tony Perkins dies in 1992, so he only has 9 years after this, which is honestly awful. And we've touched on it before, back when we were talking about Merritt Buttrick in other films. There was this time when Hollywood actors were just getting AIDS and dying, and nobody knew what to do about it. And it's just awful. And we lost Tony Perkins to AIDS, and Merritt Buttrick and Rock Hudson, and you know, yeah. I'm sad, by the way, Julia, you said what you said about Meg Tilly, because I'm in love with Meg Tilly in this movie. I mean, I think she's really great. So they do well on the on.
Is she on your laminated card?
She's not on the laminated card.
I'm more of a Jennifer Tilly fan, but I do like Meg Tilly in this movie.
Well, it's interesting to see her in this because I had forgotten how much of a kind of similar vibe they have, you know? Like,
really? I guess I don't feel like they do.
I think the way that she plays it in this, I don't think it's direct. Like, I'm not saying like, oh, they're the same, like interchangeable or whatever. But what I'm saying, like, to me, I was like, that's not. She's a Tilly, right? Like,
well, I mean,
instantly,
like
forgetting, like I'd forgotten she was in this, and as she came on, I'm like, oh yeah, and I had a little look, you know, I was like, wait a second, but
I guess I always like my
and vibe. I don't know. To me,
my mind's eye version of Jennifer Tilly is like Bride of Chucky / Liar Liar, sure, which is like more, you know, sex bomb, you know, like mid-late 30s, you know, kind of, you know, va-va-voom-y kind of so like this is what do you like. I never think of like the I guess the Jennifer Tilly from perhaps earlier. So I don't know.
Well, I think I'd seen something where she was younger. I can't remember what movie it was. Like not too long, like some point in this year, I was like, oh yeah, she was in this, and like I felt, like I said, when Meg Tilly came on screen, I was like, wait a second, and had to double check because I had just kind of forgotten, you know, that I get where you're coming from. Like they're different people, but like I definitely could say like, oh, there were just some traits and some, you know, if you go back and watch something that Jennifer Tilly's in when she's younger as well.
I
You
hadn't
might
thought
see what
about
I'm
that.
talking about. But
They are
I
very
just felt
different,
like
though.
it was very
There's a kind of oddball like aggressiveness about Jennifer Tilly,
Jennifer
and a sort
Tilly
of
is kind of a goth Jane Mansfield. That's
right,
like
right. There is a
how
Baba
I,
Boom thing about Jennifer
yeah.
Tilly that Meg
yeah.
Tilly is always like a sort of opposite number for, and maybe
Well,
that's just where they wound up as
it's more
performers.
about, like I said, some of their younger stuff, like the kind of naivete and the way she's also the way Jennifer Tilly is treated in some of her, like, oh, she's just she's that person, and Meg Tilly is that for this community.
Yeah.
Like, oh, she doesn't make the right choices, and the one woman's just mean, like she's dumb as a brick, basically. Like why do we hire this really stupid girl? It's her whole attitude.
Well,
It's like, wow,
jokes
man.
on her. She's a plant for the anti-Norman Bates crowd.
Right, that's true.
Exactly.
It's so, by the
Right.
way, that's what the plan has to involve. It has to be, all right, well, listen, honey, you need to go, that we think the state's going to assign him to work at this place. So go get a job there as a waitress and then pretend to break up with your boyfriend. And then if he doesn't offer to let you stay, you're going to have to like plant that idea in his head. But luckily he does. Like, so it's a Batman plan. I mean, it requires a lot of things to go right for her to find her way into the Bates Motel.
And that's kind of the stuff that doesn't work for me. Also, like, if her mom is so terrified of Norman Bates, why would she be okay
Want
with
her daughter to be with him.
daughter?
Yeah. Good
Excellent
point.
point. Yeah.
Really
Yeah.
Yeah,
good
there's a
point.
lot to that. I mean, it does
Yeah.
depend on a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
And that is,
Well, that's what Hitchcock used to call refrigerator logic, by which he meant the logic you think about when you're at the refrigerator after you get home from the movie, and suddenly you're getting the milk, and you go, "Hey, wait a minute," and yes,
Which,
that's
Hilarious.
by the way, I think it is like, I had this discussion when the movie Us came out with my friend Ivan, who could not get behind that movie because he felt like it required him to think too much about like all these like underground tunnels with like clones of people living in it and everything like that. And I was like, oh, I didn't care about any of that. I was just completely invested in what was going
yeah. I
on
never
the
had one
screen.
thought about it. Like,
And I think both are valid,
Yeah.
but like, it is the sort of telling way about how one person can interact with a movie one way and another person, because like somebody else might watch this movie and go, I was just too involved in Meg Tilly and Anthony Perkins relationship, and I never thought once about, oh, it doesn't exactly make sense that her mom's doing this,
Right.
like, so like, or doing it the way that she is doing.
What you do
And
love is that she's a gun mole. I mean, she switches her allegiance because gosh darn it, this Tony Perkins is too interesting as a best I can do close friend. That's it. It's
well,
because
I think I do think that she grows to feel bad for him.
no, she really likes him. She
Yeah.
seems to really
Yeah,
like
yeah.
him. Yeah, she's even trying to, she has problems herself. She's even trying to figure out ways to manipulate his condition
Well,
to
they're
make things go better for him.
they're both people that were like, the thing that works about their relationship is that they're both people that are manipulated by their mother. And
Yeah, that's right.
there's
And they both call their mother mother.
Oh
Yes.
yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's intentional. Like it's it's interesting that this movie, it doesn't delve into the ickiness of child abuse in a way that it feels like it's like hitting you over the head with it, but it's absolutely, especially all the stuff that's going on with Norman, like it's there, like it's enough there where you can think about it, but it's not it's not gross, which is, it could easily could turn into that. And I've seen, it's been too long since I've seen any of the other Psycho movies, but I seem to remember the later sequels kind of getting trashier and trashier in the way that they dealt with that.
I'd have to take a look. I don't have great faith. You never know. Sometimes weird shit happens on low budget sequels, so who knows? But yeah, I don't have high hopes. Okay, I want to switch for a second to another very strong role in here because boy is he good at being just disgusting. Is Dennis Franz plays Mr. Toomey, and there are so few actors like this. Like remember when we did Blood Beach, and the guy who played it was a different actor there playing the cigar chomping detective, and it was the same thing with the terribly fit polyester shirts and the dangling cigarettes and the just sort of greasy sliminess all the time. And it's Dennis Franz is so good at playing this kind of slime ball where nobody would like this guy. It is impossible to imagine anybody going, "Wait, gang, don't start the movie yet. Mr. Toomey's not here yet, and I really enjoy his company." There is nobody who would love this guy, and he's so good at playing that role. It's funny to me. Um,
Maybe this is just a dark time in his life when he's, in his acting out in his alcoholism.
Toomey, yeah,
Maybe.
I
that
mean,
is
I
possible.
think he's somebody that's grown to feel entitled because he's like, it seems like the state has basically put him in charge of
Of this hotel,
running
yes.
which I mean, I'm not familiar with California law, so, but like, I mean, is that a thing? Would that
I
happen?
don't know. I
Or
could
would
make
they
up some
just
shit, but
dissolve?
like,
Wouldn't they just dissolve because like somebody has to pay for well no actually this is the 80s, so maybe and he was locked up in the like the late 50s early 60s, so
yeah.
it's entirely possible that he was in a properly funded state institution for
So
most of
it
that
is
time.
Yeah.
possible that the state could assign somebody to watch these assets,
A
a
trustee. Yeah.
trustee, and that trustee probably is the person that hired Mr. Toomey. And Mr. Toomey has been keeping the place open, he says, by, allowing it to be a place where people are going to do drugs unmolested and
Right,
enjoy the
right,
benefits
An
of
adult
prostitution.
by the
motel.
hour.
Yeah. And you know, whatever. Norman doesn't approve of that stuff, so Toomey's out. But Toomey's a slime ball, and but I just think it's so fascinating all of the clues that we're getting, like in other words, there's just a big flashing light that says slime ball sort of over his head, like he's a sim with a green triangle that says slime ball on it, and
Well,
it's
even the fact that he has this very exaggerated New York accent, even
yes,
though they're in California,
right,
like there's
yeah, yeah,
no
yeah,
reason for him to sound like this.
He's
But
a slime ball. He's a Times Square when Times
yes,
Square wasn't clean.
yeah,
Like
you want
he's
to
a
buy a
Times Square.
watch?
Yeah, he's a Times Square proprietor
yeah.
from he's easily somewhere in
Well, a million of those greaseball movies.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's a trauma film like it was Exterminators or like
Well,
even
Maniac, like, certainly, shows that world. And it's intended to look ugly to a middle class audience. It's intended to like turn them on. Just like it was Burt Young in Blood Beach, who was like just belligerent to everybody he talked to and just mean and wore terrible shirts. I don't know what the purpose of this stock character is, but it certainly used to be around a lot, and you don't see it anymore. Like if I go to the movies today, you don't see this D's and Do's chain smoking, polyester wearing, sweaty guy that nobody trusts. It's a stock character that has disappeared from Hollywood. I don't know why that is. I find that fascinating. Gosh. So I don't know. What am I missing? What should I ask you about next? Because I've run out of questions on
Well,
my list of bullets.
the whole weird thing with the second mother, I didn't really love that. I'm like, why?
Very overly convenient.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's the part where I was definitely like there's bits that seem like there's a lot of twists and
Yes.
we might could trim a little bit. And
Right.
I don't mean
Right.
to second guess. I don't mean to second guess the filmmakers, but like there's a little bit. It feels again. It's what Jason. You said like a Batman plot. There's a lot that gets overcomplicated. And
Yeah.
it does keep you wondering, right? And
Right.
those are some of the things you do as you plot something. You're like, well, it's not, it doesn't have enough meet right here, so let's ratchet up a little bit, let's move this around, but when you kind of pull back from it, yeah, there's a lot
I think it's a twist too
there.
many. I
Yeah.
mean, giving away the end, the fact that Norman regresses because of all the shit that's been done to him or around him, and so that means the movie ends with Norman in a place that we don't want him to be, and that sucks. Especially that it means that the people who make the next movie are left with this place where they've written just like at the end of that
But
Halloween movie.
there's no world where the daring, the even more daring choice in this instance would have to go through the entire movie and like have Norman, maybe end up back in the hospital, but not actually kill anybody. And I know,
Yeah.
but here's the thing: there's no world where that is a movie that Hollywood makes.
Yeah.
Because it's like Tony was saying, like this is coming out in like during the slasher boom, and Universal were like, well, we own Norman Bates, let's position this into a place where we can make sequels, and make sequels they did. So like they had to get him back to a point where he's killing people again. And yeah, like it's the way it plays out in this movie is it's really sad.
Yeah, it's tragic.
Which brings me to my question about the novel, which is, so the novel, my understanding is that plot is more like Halloween, or one of those where he escapes from the mental hospital. He is not he does not have his
He
murderous
escapes. He is
inclinations
not
under
at
control.
all. He is not
Right,
at all healed in any sense. In fact,
right.
he's much more of he's a necrophiliac, and he's a
Norman in the book is not the same character that he is in the
not
film.
right.
Right. But
Right.
I'm just saying, like, if we were to say, if this had been that movie instead of this movie, the idea that he is, a bad, he's a killer, and he's even more of a killer now. He's gotten a lot worse. And what was the other part? There was something else about it, that he goes to, like, oh, because that was what I said about the Halloween. He's going to go to California to stop a movie
Yeah, they're stopping a
from being
movie
made
being made.
about
So it's like
his
Scream
story.
2, or is that
Which, yeah,
Scream
Scream,
3?
that's it. That it wasn't Halloween, Scream. Right. So that, I mean, obviously, it would a completely different movie, but I do feel like that would be a fun movie to see. It'd be kind of,
I guess it would. There
I
are so many.
think that the book Psycho 2 was Bloch kind of probably expressing some frustration on how Hitchcock and Hollywood had sort of remade his character and their image, and
Yeah.
it had become the default version of Norman Bates, and remains to be
Yeah.
that, because like when they did the Bates Motel TV show, he's a riff on the Anthony Perkins character.
Absolutely.
Like
Yeah.
the character of first of all, the Norman Bates in the books looks much more like Dennis Franz than
Right.
Anthony
No,
Perkins.
he's chubby. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
I just realized Dennis Franz, it could have played either a cop or a sleazy proprietor in When a Stranger Calls.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like he could have played either character. He would have been sleazy kind of cop, or hard boiled kind of cop, or a sleazy hour, by the hour hotel person in that movie. Like in fact, he could have played both. That would have. There's a separate dimension where he's like playing both.
Speaking of cops, I do love that the sheriff isn't immediate. Like the sheriff in this is kind of the anti-Dirty Harry, because he seems to be 100% kind of sympathetic to, like, he does his job, like he looks into the killings and everything, but like he seems pretty sympathetic to Norman Bates. He also he has, I'm paraphrasing, but when he figures out about the Meg Tilly's character plan with her mom,
yeah,
he has this great thing where he gives her what they call them, the TV tropes, that he gives her the reason you suck speech, and he's
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
you two are way sicker than Norman is, you know.
Well,
Like,
you get the impression in general his thing is the it's a shame what happened to that boy kind
Yeah.
of feeling, because yes, he is a killer, but he went to an institution. He's trying. He may or may not agree that he's paid his dues, but he also knows, he's aware of what Norman went through, and he's aware of the ending scene in Psycho, right?
Yeah.
Like, or that happened. It's so like it is interesting that he's not, oh great, look, they release another weirdo into my town.
Right.
That he actually is going, that this was a tragedy that happened. It'd be better if we could forget about it. But boy, in my time here, I've seen it's a real shame what happened to that kid. That's the kind of vibe that he gives. And that's an interesting, again, they made a lot of choices that are better than expected from, oh look, a sequel to a Hitchcock movie.
Yeah. That's
well,
absolutely right.
I also really think that they got a lot of good character, like Robert Loggia is the psychiatrist as well. Like,
Yes.
like
Oh,
they could have.
yeah.
It's not a big part though. They could have probably gotten anybody, but the fact that they got like a pretty skilled actor, like you see like the conflict he has as, he's Norman's doctor. He wants to see Norman, heal and do well, but when things start to get kind of like they start to go haywire, he's also like, young lady, maybe you shouldn't necessarily be staying with him,
Right.
like that kind of thing. So like he's got like this like dual nature, and I think that that's probably pretty realistic for a guy in his position, because he does obviously very much care about Norman, but he also knows that under the right circumstances he could be dangerous. And
What's striking me is that all of that means, that we talked about how this is kind of more of a crime story. There's twists and stuff. Think about this as a response to Halloween, where the psychiatrists come into the town and stuff like that. How different this guy is.
He's the anti-Loomis.
Yes, the that Loomis. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
The funny thing is, though, is the other thing that this is versus the original Psycho. When you compare it to the original, for sure, and this is something it has in common with the original Halloween, is that it is very much a post Friday the 13th slasher movie, in that it is very violent at times.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
I'm blanking on the actress's name, the mom,
Vera Miles.
Vera Miles. Her death is very, very, like, that could be a kill in a Friday the 13th movie.
That
it's
effect
very over the
stuck
top.
with me for years. I loved
That
is
is
the wrong word. It's impressive, is what.
Well, again, it is, and why people were, again, like, oh look, they're taking our, they got to remake this. Hitchcock would have never done that, but it is exactly what I was talking about, where they're taking it and putting it into an 83 slasher context.
I don't know that you know what I also don't know that what Hitchcock would have done if he was
right, yeah.
If he had come
That's
like
fair.
Because like he does, like the shower scene being what it is, like he does linger an awful lot on blood going down the drain. So like if you had given Alfred Hitchcock 1983 makeup effects, I don't think we know what he would have done, because having recently
what's the slasher that he did in London at near the end of his life? Frenzy. Yeah, Frenzy's pretty dark.
But not just that, not just the effects, but the ability to show you could show a blood spray or a splatter, or not to say that he would do that necessarily, but given, we don't know, because now the difference is you can have a Jason, you can have a Michael Myers, which is, why, again, part of why Psycho is shot, like the shower scene is shot the way it is it's masterful for everything that it is, but it's also a product of, this is what we're going to do at this time, and
this is what we can do.
Like, I think he gets away with more in Psycho because it's black and white.
Absolutely.
I think color blood always changes things.
Oh,
Like if the shower
100%.
scene was in color, it would have a different impact. But
I mean, I
Remember
don't
they
even know if it would
splashed.
have as much of an impact. It's, I mean,
no,
it's a
I'm
lot
not
of, it's a
saying
lot
better.
of,
I'm just saying
yeah,
different.
sure.
But the you know, like you know, the gore in this, I think it's partly there to make it a commercial movie for 1983. You
Yeah.
know, like you know, like they were, but also you know, it's all well done. Like, and it's not like this is a, like there are kill scenes in this, but it's not like it's a body count movie. You
That's
know, that
correct.
is the other thing. Like it is structured much more like a mystery than you know, like a lot of slashers have mysteries in them, but they're still, you
Right.
know, they're
There's a
based
kill
around,
every 10 minutes, you know,
yeah,
top.
yeah.
That's
And this is, you know, definitely more character based. You know, as far as what Hitchcock would have or would not have done, I will say this: I recently rewatched The Birds,
Hmm.
and I, you know, for the first time in probably 5 years, and I had forgotten how sadistic that movie is. Like that movie, like, you know, whereas Psycho is fairly restrained, like The Birds is very visceral. So
Hmm.
like Hitchcock had different moods that you could find him in depending on what movie he was, you know, like you know,
Totally.
he had his tools in his toolbox and he was going to use them to scare you, you know, or give you, keep you on the edge of your seat. You
Yeah.
know what's funny? Before we get off the subject of Alfred Hitchcock, but I was surprised the other day. I have this T-shirt that I have that it's the outline of Alfred Hitchcock, but it's, you know, all the Hitchcock blondes inside of it, but they're drawn in a style that they look almost like Barbies.
Really?
And yeah, and somebody said, "Oh, you know, that's a neat Barbie T-shirt." And I was like, "Well, it's not really Barbie. It's Alfred Hitchcock. These are Hitchcock blondes." And this is a person, they weren't super young, but they had no idea who Alfred Hitchcock was. And
Huh.
that just like really stayed with me for a few days, because they're like, "Oh, well, like I, you know, like if it's anything even remotely scary or, you know, anything like that, I so go out of my way to avoid it. Like the only reason why I know who Stephen King is through cultural osmosis." And I was like, well, I feel like, you know, Psycho is something a lot of people, like the shower scene has been parodied so many
Yeah, but
times.
we're just so
And
much farther. Like it was 22 years ago in 1983. It's now however long
Well,
ago that is. It's 60 years. I mean, so
also,
yeah.
you know, we've talked a lot about it contextually. So there's a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of factors contextually. Like you may not even get what's a parody because it's like, you know, what's a Godzilla movie, what's a King Kong movie, what's a, you know, it's so many generations removed. But I think for where I have to take a step back is when we were growing up, again, we talked about how you would see this on all the time. And that's the same with the movies, or it would be the opposite. You better catch it on next night, because if not, who knows when you're going to see it again. Whereas, so you kind of curated your viewing, right? Whereas now, if you can watch anything you ever want to watch, of course there's exceptions, right? Like, I mean, we've ran into things that you can't find, but in general, there is always something to watch, I guess is where really,
Correct. For sure.
right? Like I can watch a YouTube video, I can watch a movie, I can watch a TV show, I can watch commercials, I can not watch commercials, I could play a video, like so that kind of, you know, hey, haven't you seen Psycho? Like I've sometimes softened it a little bit in the fact that if you don't have somebody helping you curate even, or you're receptive to that, right? Like,
Yeah.
why should I, if I enjoy watching people, you know, let's play videos or Minecraft, you know, any kind of, like, that's what I watch, or makeup tips, or whatever, you know, the vast world of, you know, discussions about musicals, right? Anything, like
Well, there's
you get
also
to
the
be
fact
masters
that
of your destiny on that, and that's not, so it's harder. Again, like I said, I've softened somewhat because I go, wow, you know, I don't know what it would have been like I don't have to watch any of those crusty old movies
right.
because I
And you
don't
also
have to, and
received wisdom is different. I mean, think about the
yeah,
fact that, you know, we took it for granted growing up because everybody told us, "Hey, Hitchcock is a genius." and so everybody needs to know Psycho, and Bride of Frankenstein is the best Universal horror, and whatever. You just take this stuff as just sort
Sure.
of a given. It's right or it's wrong. Nobody said like, well, why wasn't it Peeping Tom? How come it was Psycho and not Peeping Tom that became the thing that
Right.
everybody says to watch? I don't know,
Well,
but that
that
was
fades into it is so people can catch something and go, well, I watched this first and I don't like I saw this before Psycho and I think it's better or whatever. And
yeah,
again, you're that's not a knock at all, but just how we view things has changed in such a drastic manner that it is hard to be too harsh. I mean, now if somebody's coming from a hey, I'm an expert at this, and you're like, well, have you seen? And I'm not like I would never go, well, you're
Well,
not an expert if you haven't seen this, but
I do
instead you
get
kind of
it.
go, yeah,
I do understand why somebody who has said that, like, okay, if it's like I understand it a little bit more if somebody who says like I absolutely 100% avoid all scary subject matter might not be familiar with the filmography of Alfred Hitchcock.
yeah,
However, the Norman Bates character, it's not like he hasn't been with us. Like there was a remake, the
sure.
Bates Motel TV show was around. They had their own variation on the shower scene. Like it's not like this character is. It's funny because like people were clutching their pearls when this movie came out about how untouchable the material is, and yet what we've seen is that it's a well that you can still go back to and
Sure.
find variations on.
well, also, I mean, truly, I feel like I think a difference between now and 1983, and I think we should start wrapping up. But a difference between now and 1983 is that in 1983 there was still a monoculture that told us pretty well, reliably, what the canon was, and I think that's more or less gone. And now there's no canon. There's just billions of people, each with their own canon, and that's good and that's bad, but it's just a different world. I don't think anything is sacred anymore, and I'm not being a jerk ass when I say that. I mean, but I don't think it's just not the way that it was. You could probably go ahead and do a sequel to any classic movie, and there might be one pompous gas bag who's offended by it, and everybody else would just simply not even know that the old existed.
Yeah, I mean, it is. If you are, I get it. If you are a film historian or somebody who enjoy, like, if you're, we all enjoy this, and so if somebody's like, I haven't even seen that old one. Like, what's the point? Even it is
Yeah.
sometimes hard to go like, no, it's really good. I mean, we wouldn't have this if it wasn't for that. I think if you like this stuff, I really do think you should see that because it's good. But
Well, that's the realm of historian. See, that's the thing. I've talked about that with a number of like David Bowles and I have talked about this before. That basically the bottom line is there is stuff that is just the realm of historians, and they're the only people who are going to be interested in this, and everybody else is just simply not. And that's
but
and
there's
that's okay.
But it also, we go back to it a lot, is there's always room for a good something.
Yes,
Like
there
if
could be a
it's
new
good, it's
Dracula
good.
next month, and I'm sure it could be wonderful. So yeah,
Why not?
why not?
Right.
Absolutely.
But viewing that is again, it's a totally different lens as well.
So, all right, let's get our final thoughts. If you want to talk about the ending, which we have just smoothed over, but basically, you could listen to this show we just had, and you kind of know how it ends, but there's still a lot of surprises. But I want to get our final thoughts because I feel like we've talked about the themes pretty well. Tony, have we done a good service to Psycho 2?
I'm torn because I think there's a lot to talk about the movie, and you could go scene by scene because there is slasher stuff. There's kids in the basement. There's very typical Friday the
Yeah.
13th. Well, we got to have this because we got to keep up with the Joneses in this manner, right?
Yes.
But
The
it's a
distinctly
weird,
unsexy teen sex that goes on in the
yeah. I mean, still sexier perhaps than some of the stuff I've seen in something weird, at Weird Wednesdays.
for sure.
Like, which always tended to be like, how do you make this so trying to be erotic and yet the opposite.
Right.
But there's a lot of stuff in there, but it does, there's a lot of really good thriller elements. There's detective work. We're gonna go to the swamp and we're gonna do, we didn't cover perhaps a lot of the thriller parts of this but I kind of like that we're all coming at it from a different manner, and perhaps maybe like Drew was saying, where it's kind of people are revisiting this movie. Maybe I'm okay with not having spoiled as much so that you can revisit it on because we'll go back and forth depending on the movie. I think talking about the themes and talking about where this lies has been really interesting. I don't think it's a movie I would revisit a lot, but it is surprising to see how it works and how it keeps the twists and turns going, especially again the amount of time between the original and this. It plays into that, and I think that's kind of interesting as well, right? Like it's the time to do this in a way, even if people didn't think about it perhaps at the time. So I don't know if this goes up with the reevaluation of perhaps like Halloween 3, which I think we all agreed was like this is a decent one that was done a disservice by being called a sequel to Halloween 2. But I do think that there's some really interesting stuff in here, and I remember being shocked at various parts, but it been just long enough where I had forgotten enough of it as well. So yeah, really, I think this is a good one to pick.
Thank you so much, and I've really enjoyed. Everything you said, Julia. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, as we've been talking about it, I'm just thinking about the different performances and how interesting, it's a great cast, really, really great cast. So I think that really gets
Yeah.
you a long way. Well written script, well directed. It's neat that they did work so hard to, to bring back the original, like they use the original house, which I've seen. I don't know if you've ever been on the Universal backlot tour, but they always do. They show you
Yeah,
drive by it and you realize how small it is, and it's just a totally forced perspective thing to make the house look like it's huge. And then they rebuilt the part of the hotel, and then they used like matte painting for the rest of it. And they found all these old original props, and they really just wanted it to look the set to look the same as the original. So I think that's neat. I think there's a lot of neat touches like that that make it kind of a neat special project. So yeah, it's definitely worth watching. I personally love the first one more, but I mean, it's not at all a bad movie for sure, and it's really has a lot of great qualities to it.
The set dressing was really well
oh
handled.
yeah,
Mhm.
That they really set it. You never feel like, oh, this is 83. Well, I'm sure some people do, but I never got that. Oh, this is the 80s version of that. It is close enough that you feel like, oh yeah, we're in the Bates house.
Yeah,
We're in the
right.
exactly.
Bates Motel. Like it
That's an
makes
excellent
sense.
point. I mean, think about like
Yeah.
Halloween 4, where they have a totally different house to be the Myers house. There's no intent whatsoever to try to recapture the original
Yeah.
house because they were like, who cares? But this
Right.
one, they really try to nail
Yeah,
it.
it's really important.
Yeah,
Yeah, I thought that some of that is a little unsung in the fact that a lot of the choices and then the switcheroos they do with the set dressing as well, really nice. But it all has that flavor of, oh, now we're seeing this in color,
Yeah,
right? Like that's the thing.
the gaslighting is really well done. Like the way that these women gaslight him is really effective because the fact that they
So horrible.
all the
Yeah.
whole the eyeball in the hole in the wall and everything, and the room being completely his mother's room and then not at all. All that stuff was fantastic. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of neat stuff.
But yeah, like I said, I like the idea. I didn't really think of it now, but it does have the flavor of, oh, this is just now that we shoot in color, this is what the house looks like in color.
yeah,
Like I
yeah.
personally never felt taken out of that. Down to the where he's shoveling coal, and oh, there used to be a mummified mom there.
Yes.
You know, like that's where a mummified mother was. Now it's completely just coal,
And now
Yes.
and that's
and
fascinating.
soon there will be another mummified mom somewhere else.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly, right. But
Good
that's
grief.
that there's touches throughout that are perhaps even more beholden, and when the exhumation scene where it feels like, oh well, that's the corpse from the original. Yeah, definitely, right. All of that feels legit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Drew, what about you?
I like the movie. I really liked this discussion because I think it helped me compartmentalize and dissect my feelings about Norman Bates, which, as I said, are kind of complicated. And as I come around now to thinking about the end of the movie, how I just have this deep sadness for him because I would like to feel that he could be the best version of himself, and that exists. It's again, it's not like he's Freddy Krueger. He's not willfully bad, and I have a lot of sympathy for him.
Yeah.
So there's that, but also like there's the, Drew in 2023 looking at this movie and this character that evokes all these sort of complicated feelings. And now I get to sort of verbally take that apart. And I mean, I don't know that I've come to like a definitive answer about what we should do with characters like Norman Bates. I don't know that there may not be a definitive answer to be had, frankly, but I think that the discussion that we've had is one that I'm very grateful because I found it very profoundly cathartic for me. Because like honestly, Jason, like when you said that you had picked this, like for a minute there, I did have like a moment of panic about discussing
And
this.
I apologize. I did not think about that, and that's a problem.
Well, I mean, but it ended up being a good thing. So like, it's we're all fine. And I'm glad that I made myself watch the movie because I was able to dissect my feelings about this character. And I'm grateful for that. So if nothing else, I think that it's taken out. But like just as a movie itself, like Julia said, like it's got a great cast. So if you want to see some terrific acting in a 1983 horror film, like that, frankly, I think you're better off not watching the original Psycho before watching this because I debated watching them back to back, and I think that this might be better viewed with the original with some distance, because I think the sort of switching of the hero and villain roles, I think you'll find yourself more comfortable with that. And but yeah, there's some definite stuff here that works. Definitely not better than the original, though. That's crazy talk.
When you're talking though, and I hope this isn't too pretentious, but it did remind me. I mean, that's part of what we keep talking about about why horror movies I think are important. I certainly didn't mean this. I know that this would be kind of a breakthrough in some ways, but that ability to reflect and parse things, I think, is part of the magic of horror movies and why we enjoy them. But I keep coming back to that. I know we said it a lot, but that's
it's also horrors. As someone who has, I always struggle with ways to describe this. We'll just say it like this at this moment. As someone who has a brain that works differently than the average person's, the outsider art about aspect of the horror genre is something that is definitely deeply appealing to me, and it's certainly one of the reasons why I have this affinity for monsters, and so I think horror that never gets its due as a place that we can have these sort of discussions. So you're 100% right there.
Wonderful. I have nothing to add to that. I'm going to let it lie there. Let's do endorsements. I'm dying to know what you guys would recommend, and also you can think about the fact that we might be out a couple of weeks. We'll certainly be back probably once or twice during the holidays, I assume, God willing and the creek don't rise, but it could be time. So however you want to recommend something. I'm dying to know what you want to recommend. So, Tony, what do you got for us?
I was surprised at how much I've enjoyed it. It was a little slow for me. I wasn't an instant like this is for me, but I dig it. It's the new Scott Pilgrim series that's out, which is I kind of don't want to say too much because if you enjoyed the originals, and I recently watched the movie because I have it on UHD, and I was a fan of the comic, in its original black and white. Although if you're listening to this and you're also Scott, and I need to post this on social media, if you dig on Scott Pilgrim, I think an underrated thing that's similar, because a lot of our books when we were working for Tokyo Pop didn't get the word of mouth. There's a lot of, we could have a whole podcast just about what it was like during that time period and working for Tokyo Pop. But there was a book called Doggy Walks Alone, and if you want those same vibe, I think it didn't get what it didn't get its due, I think. And it was one of my favorite books that was put out by Tokyo Pop. And I think a lot of people, I think Scott Pilgrim's way different, but Doggy Walks Alone, if you enjoy that, if you enjoy Scott Pilgrim, I think maybe go back and find a copy. I think it has that, the video game references, all the stuff that people enjoy about Scott Pilgrim is there. And I think, so this new series I really enjoyed so far. I need to catch up. There's 2 episodes I need to catch up, but there was a really good episode that had this musical moment. The soundtrack, of course, is great. They get the voice actors, for better or worse. I have a lot of friends in the voice acting community, so it's kind of tough when they go, "Hey, we're hiring all the actors from the movie," when you kind of want like voice actors to take those roles, But they, the cast from the movie does all the voices. That's cool. It looks great. And there's some really great musical moments in it as well. I really enjoyed that. I also, now people can actually watch Monarch, which I'm just super excited. Stick with it would be my review. I've seen kind of a lot of positive but also mixed reviews with the first 2 episodes, but I think it does everything I wanted it to do.
It's something in the
it's not a monster
something
wrestling
in the Godzilla universe, right?
Yeah, it's not a monster wrestling show. It wasn't meant to be. But what it does is in the Godzilla MonsterVerse universe, like it's really cool to see stories in that at the ground level. And it has made me even more excited for Godzilla -1, which I'm kind of sad because I don't think it's opening in enough theaters for me. I think I don't know who's making the decision not to send it wide in the US. Because it's gotten such great reviews, and maybe there'll be a groundswell. That's what I hope. Who knows? I mean, it's going to be hard to compete with, for example, Wonka, right? Like Christmas, like we're entering a Christmas holiday period. It's going to be hard to do, And I also got to see a couple of really good movies lately. Holdovers is also really good. That's going wider. And Dream Scenario with Nick Cage. I'm anxious. Ray and I are going to go see that. We're talking about that. I'm glad that's increasing. The increasing number of theaters that's expanding. And then I've also been playing the latest Yakuza, which I get to virtually visit Japan while beating up bad guys. And also, another thing I love is about those games is they're ridiculous, but there's also a story. But then you can go, if you want to, you can just go play virtual pool or golf for hours. If you or darts, virtual darts. Like if you just want to, you can continue the plot or beat up fools in the Coliseum, but you can just do any of that. I love the way they structured it. So like, hey, I'm gonna go play virtual pool or mahjong. You can play mahjong for hours. Mahjong, like if you're a mahjong fan, you could just go play that. I don't know the game enough to do that, but I find it fascinating, and I also love the parts of Japan that I know that I've visited. There's enough little bits that I go, oh, like there's a dollar store called Don Quixote that is featured in some of them, and it's kind of fun just to go in that store. Again, I'm a little bit long-winded, but that's what I've been doing, and that's what I'm looking forward to.
I love it. Well, happy Thanksgiving. That'll fill your time. That's good.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Julia, what do you have to endorse?
I don't think I really can think of anything this week because I didn't really. Did I see anything new? I can't even think of anything I saw.
Have we in fact, other than The Crown, is back?
Oh yeah, the new season.
Which is just
I don't know why people are giving it not not giving it good reviews for the
See,
most
I
part.
wasn't even
As far as
aware
I
of that, so it didn't.
but, well, I just heard through the grapevine. I don't read reviews, but I hear, people talk about things. But, I mean, it made me cry. I was, like, sad about Diana all over again. It's like, "Oh my
Mm.
gosh," because it's, that's hard. And it's only the first half of of season 6 has been released. Apparently, the second half will bring us even more, current, not to just, like, the last year or 2, but the last decade. But yeah, I thought it was really good. I mean, the actress, forgetting her name, that plays Diana is really great. She's just perfect.
I don't remember, but yes, no, she's fantastic.
So yeah, that's a good one. Thanks for reminding me.
Totally.
I have enjoyed it. And happy Thanksgiving to everybody.
Yeah. Drew, what about you?
Well, oddly, or perhaps not oddly, I am going to endorse an episode of a podcast. It's a podcast that I have been a guest on a few times. It's called the Tomb of Ideas. It is a Marvel horror podcast. They discuss, as you could imagine, they discuss Marvel horror comics. A lot of the times, in particular, Marvel 70s monster comics like Werewolf by Night and Tomb of Dracula, things of that nature. However, this last week they had my good buddy David Avalone on, and for those not in the know, he is the foremost writer of Elvira comics. He has done all of the Dynamite Elvira comics, and they had a discussion with him about the 1988 Marvel adaptation of the film
Huh.
Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. They discussed the movie a lot because they have to, but to be clear, they are not discussing the movie necessarily. They are discussing Marvel's comic book version
That is hilarious.
of the movie. It is a delightful conversation, and you do learn a lot about how these sort of adaptation comics were made back in the day. And you learn a lot about, if you're because David knows Cassandra Peterson a bit, you do learn quite a bit about her as a person. So it was just a really good conversation. And I think if you are an Elvira fan, and if you're listening to this podcast, there's a good chance that you might be. You'll get something out of it. If you are a comic book fan, you'll get something out of it. So it works on multiple levels. I also want to give a shout out that 30 Coins is back on Max. They've just started a new season, and I feel like because it's a foreign TV show, a lot of people who would really love it are sleeping on it. And look, if you're like, I don't want to read subtitles, Max has a dubbed version. Go crazy. This new season has Paul Giamatti in it, so they've
Nice.
added in an American movie star too, if that has any appeal to you. But besides that, if you are a horror fan, this show, at least every episode, you get at least one memorably nuts image out of it, sometimes more than one. But it is I really want more people to watch this show, because I feel like it's the Clive Barker Indiana Jones mashup that I never knew that I wanted, but now I want nothing but that. And it's just a terrific show. So get past the fact that it is a foreign production and watch 30 Coins. It's worth it.
I need to catch that. I don't know. I keep almost doing it, and I get distracted. Drew, by the way, on that podcast, have they covered the Power Records stuff? That would be cool.
Think so. They did just spend, actually the last time I was on the show, they basically dissected all of Inferno, and I was part of that discussion. But that took up basically all of summer and fall. Like the Elvira episode, I don't know if they've ever done any of the Power Records. Perhaps you should reach out to them about that.
That'd be cool, because that was that's how I got introduced to Marvel horror, was the comics that were in the records, that then were there. I mean, the records were adaptations of those comics, so it was like the cyclical thing, right round like a record, baby.
I think you should reach out to them and suggest that, because I think that would be a fun episode, and perhaps they could have you guest star on that.
I definitely don't want to start myself into their shenanigans.
Well,
but I think
they frequently have people on the show as like a third talking head. I think they I think
cool.
they would enjoy having you on. I don't know. I don't want to speak for other people.
Yeah. That's cool. I will have to reach out, but
regardless,
I would love to.
whether they've
That's
done
an interesting discussion. So
whether they've done those or not, I will say that I think that you would enjoy listening to the episodes, because they cover a lot of really fun stuff, including they've had an episode on the Marvel Godzilla. So, which I wanted to be on, but somebody beat me to. So yeah.
Awesome. My only endorsement really quickly is to tune in over the next week, because I'm going to be doing an interview with the author of the Godzilla. He is doing a thing on Godzilla, but the Twilight Zone haiku book, Chad Ellis Boykin. We did an interview. I'll be putting it up soon, but you definitely got to check out Twilight Zone Haiku, which is a book that includes a haiku based on each episode of the Twilight Zone. It is wonderful. It's really, and it was a fun conversation. So I'll be getting that up very soon.
That just reminds me of my early nerd tech thing. The program Lightwave that was on the Amiga. Babylon 5 was a lot of FX were done Lightwave. There was a Star Trek haiku generator. Somebody just had used the scripting tools in Lightwave to make a haiku, and it just had this list of the correct syllables that could be put together. So it was like, Spock waffles while Kirk flamigens, or what. It was just this whole and you just of course, you're bored in the computer lab, and it just makes Star Trek haikus. So that's pretty good.
Sweet. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Happy Thanksgiving. And I've really enjoyed talking. So everybody enjoy one another's company, and we will talk to you very, very soon. Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Night.
Everyone.